Yes. So the Gender Empowerment Through Politics in the Classroom, GEPIC, is a 3-year initiative funded by the European Commission and delivered across 6 European countries: Belgium, Czech Republic, Denmark, Germany, Spain, and the UK. And the project explores how teaching in secondary schools can support second-year students in developing the confidence to express their views and engage in civic life. And it places particular emphasis on supporting young girls early in their secondary education to build confidence in their own perspectives. And with that context in mind, I'm pleased to introduce our guest speakers. So as I was mentioning before, today we will have a double session. In the first part, Fernanda Gándara will present about her work on gender perspectives in Room to Read. Dr. Fernanda Gándara is the Director of Research, Monitoring and Reporting for Room to Read Girls Education Program. Her career encompasses leading innovative evaluations and research studies across historical low-income countries, conducting extensive psychometric analysis to enhance data measurement and presenting findings to policymakers to inform decision-making. In the second half of the session, Professor Hoskins and Dr. Dinh will present about testing inclusive citizenship methods, specifically counter-narratives. Professor Hoskins has a chair in comparative social science at the University of Roehampton. She is a world-leading expert on citizenship education, specializing in inequalities and political socialization across Europe and the Middle East. She is currently in the UK lead of the 2 major EU Horizon grants, the GEPIC project, and also strategies for achieving equity and inclusion in education. Dr. Nguyen Dinh is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Roehampton, working on the STRIDE and GEPIC projects led by Professor Brian E. Hoskins, and she holds a doctorate from Brugge University, Brussels, sorry for my pronunciation, a master's degree from the same university, and a master's degree in educational statistics and research methods from KU Leuven. So thank you very much for the three of you of presenting today. And I think we will start with Fernanda. Thank you, Fernanda.
Thank you, Natalia. And I do need you to make me the presenter. If you can do that, I can share my screen.
Done.
Done. Perfect. And can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. One ask from my end, if you can give me a heads up, 18 minutes, 20 minutes, that'd be great. And when Natalia invited me to speak today, she gave me a very broad sort of topic, and I was thinking which angle to present on, and I decided to go very high level, and I am happy to go into more details in the Q&A part of the session. But yes, I think as you probably all know, we're going through a very interesting political period, and gender programming and the work that we do has taken a slightly different meaning. So I would like to share some insights from my work doing evaluation of girls and gender equality programs, particularly at Room to Read, but also I will draw from my previous experience doing extensive evaluation of both gender and literacy programs, which is also something that Room to Read does. But let me get into these details right now. So I work for Room to Read. As Natalia said, I am the Director of Research, Monitoring and Evaluation for the Girls' Education and Gender Equality portfolio of programs. And Room to Read is an organization that works in partnership with governments and with public school systems around the world to eliminate illiteracy and gender inequality. So that's the broad mission of Room to Read. And so it does that through two portfolio of programs. The literacy portfolio, which focuses on early grades and is implemented through training teachers, training government officials, and training a lot of stakeholders that work in literacy in different countries, but then also implementing methodologies so that children learn how to read and also how to love reading, because this is not just about the metrics of how many words you read, which is obviously important, but Room to Read's mission goes way beyond that. And so they also implement libraries in the different schools and in the communities. And what they try to do is to work with what that team tries to do is to work with local, authors and local publishers, and try to generate some literacy ecosystem, so that people in that community develop not just literacy and reading skills, but a love for reading. So it's a very successful and it's a very inspiring portfolio of programs. And then the gender equality portfolio works with older students, typically girls, but not just girls. And it's a program that starts in grade 6. The portfolio of programs start in grade 6, and our longest program goes all the way through grade 12. So basically supports students through their entire secondary education. And what the gender equality portfolio does is to build life skills, gender knowledge, and other technical skills to support students, particularly girls, to face the enormous barriers that they face in their daily lives. So that's the program that I oversee. I'll give you a very quick overview of the programs within the portfolio. We have this core girls education program, which runs from grade 6 to 12. It goes, it operates in 8 different countries. And this has been the program that this was the first program that we implemented under the gender equality portfolio. And, this is most of the learnings, I guess, that I'll be sharing today come from the core GP, but not only from the core GP, but it's a very rich program that requires very thoughtful evaluation, because you're basically accompanying the girls in this very delicate years and in very important transitions. So it's a very interesting, meaningful, and I'm really proud of the program. Then we have the climate clubs, which are our 2-year program interventions that focus on life skills, on gender, but also on climate literacy. Right now we're piloting the program in 2 countries, in Nepal and Vietnam, and also a lot of good insights from that, from those interventions. Then we have what we call the Life Skills for Equality projects, which focus primarily on boys and their gender attitudes and their role in, gender equality more broadly, through life skills, but also through gender training and gender knowledge. Then we have financial education initiatives, which focus on life skills, gender, and financial literacy. And more recently, we have a multimedia program called She Creates Change, which operates through videos and related materials that describe the stories of core GP alumni. So basically, we take stories from girls who have successfully completed the girls' education program, and we create videos and additional material to inspire future generations of girls. And it is a program that started this year. So that's in a nutshell what we do in terms of programming. And the whole goal here is to work towards a more gender equal world. And and tackling some of the most urgent needs that we see in that regard, including things like climate justice and, justice more generally. But yeah, I could go forever here. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. And if you have questions about any of the programs, of course, let me know. I want to share a few insights that I feel are important to say today in 2025. Not so much because they are new, but because they are important. And I think we need to share these ideas again and again until we overcome, I think, some of the challenges that we're seeing today. So the first thing I want to share is that from the sector, and people in my position, we have a responsibility to generate more data and more meaningful gender data, because there's a ton of reasons to invest in gender equality. People would mention, economic reasons, the associations between educated population and all this sort of macro indicators. There's social reasons to invest in gender equality. There's moral reasons to invest in gender equality. Basically, every human being deserves an equal chance to live a dignified and fulfilling life. But the issue is that if we don't invest in gender, if we don't push for gender equality, it doesn't happen. Not only it doesn't happen, what we're seeing since last year, and I'm sure most of you know these things, but the trends are in reversal. So starting last year, we're seeing that equality is not just stagnated, but it's actually starting to decrease. And of course, these things change by country, but one of the things that's fueling this is that gender data is being defunded. And so right now, if you look at what some organizations are trying to raise awareness on, is that we don't have enough gender data. Gender is being defunded, and without gender data, we cannot keep pushing towards gender equality. We need to make some of the problems that we see and that we get to see because we work in this, but we need to make them more visible. We need to make gender gaps visible. We need to be able to advocate for better policy, and for that, we do need data. We need to increase or continue to increase awareness among the population. And for that matter, gender data and narratives are very important. And very importantly, as I've been trying to sort of say, we need to counteract all these anti-gender efforts that we're seeing operate from all directions, right? From the top down, from all sides, we're seeing that there's this anti-gender wave that is impacting the work that we're doing. And so I think more than ever, we need to generate not just data, not just gender data, but data that's actually useful to sort of, have a voice in this conversation. So give me 1 second here. The other point that I want to, this is stating the obvious maybe, but we do need to continue to generate data about the effectiveness of our interventions. For example, the program that I oversee is very effective in improving life skills and gender knowledge across contexts. And this is particularly evident in our 7-year program. So this is just one example that I took from the last report that we shared publicly, but this is more or less what we see across all of our evaluations. We see that our life skills, most of our life skills, not always all of them, but most of our life skills are meaningfully improved after a couple of years. And then gender knowledge and attitudes are particularly, the program is particularly effective in improving the gender knowledge and attitudes of the participants. Our effect sizes are fairly high. For those of you who work in evaluation, you know that, for example, an effect size of 0.6 is actually pretty high for these types of interventions. So we know this, but we need to keep sharing it. We need to keep telling people, yes, there's this problem, gender inequality, but there's a lot that we can do. And there's actually, this is an example of a program that works really well. You can take pieces of this program, or you can see this other, interventions that are actually very effective in building skills that can counteract some of the problems that we're seeing in terms of gender inequality. I think we need effectiveness data that is nuanced, though. Here I'm showing one of the graphs that I think is in the this is in a boys inclusion program report. But, when we start digging deeper into what exactly is changing, one of the things that we know and that we're proud of is that we're changing things, we're changing attitudes and knowledge around things that are very delicate and important. For example, here, gender-based violence, among all these 5 subdomains, gender subdomains here, is the most significantly improved in the course of 2 years. And more than getting into the specifics of this graph, because you don't know the metrics, and I would need to explain too many things for you to fully get this graph. If you take a look at the left side, all of the changes that we see across all the domains are very significant. And these are things that we care deeply about. I mean, we're changing attitudes and knowledge around gender norms, around gender-based roles. We have boys, for example, way more engaged in home chores and in understanding, how the time that's spent in home chores is affecting girls in a certain way. We're changing things that are actually very, very meaningful for the fight that we want to give, right? So not only we need effectiveness data, we need effectiveness data that is nuanced and that shows what is possible through gender programming, and that the changes that we see and the skills that we build are very important for the challenges that we face in our society. Another sort of idea I wanted to share today is that we need to generate data on how long-lasting skills develop. And what I want to say here is that too often I run into evaluation reports that look at, like a 6-week program that shows the effectiveness of a particular intervention. And my question is always like, well, how is this going to look in 3 years from now? Especially from my perspective, working, for instance, in a program that lasts 7 years, or the core girls' education program is so long that we get to look into trajectories. And I'm going to come to this point in the next slide, I think. But, long-lasting skills are actually difficult to develop. And from our experience, we've seen that with the dosage that we are used to work with, which is bi-weekly life skills sessions and bi-weekly sort of interventions, it takes something like 2 years to start seeing meaningful changes, meaningful and consistent changes in some of the skills that we're trying to improve. So it takes time. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as we look into this data and evidence and as we think about evaluation in general. But that's one thing. But then the other thing is that it seems, or the data that we gather or that we have gathered across different programs seems to suggest that the life skills developed simultaneously. There's always this correlations, very high correlations between all the gains. And right here, I'm showing a graph that shows correlations between different life skills, decision-making, relationship building, and gender knowledge, and then self-reported notions of learning. What do I mean by that? We ask participants at the end of our evaluations, okay, how much do you think you learned about, gender norms or gender-based violence, And we ask them those questions for all the core domains of the program. And we do that for a number of reasons, but we also do it to understand, well, are students aware of their own learning, and is the learning that they're reporting consistent with what we're seeing throughout our tools? But here, more than that, what I want to show you is that for example, up here, there's strong correlations. The size of the ball indicates higher, like stronger correlation. Everything is blue here, so everything is positive. And I'm sorry that I don't have all the time to go into the details of reading graphs, but up here, what we see essentially is a very strong correlation between different domains, which again we see it in every single evaluation that we conduct to some extent. But then what's interesting is, for example, girls who report having learned a lot about resilience, they generally also report having learned a lot about leadership and having learned a lot about gender norms and gender-based violence. And to some extent, one of the things that we're learning is that not only these things develop together, but that there's some correlation between participants' perception of their learning and all of this. And so one of the questions that you have is like, okay, how can you convey, for example, all the things that I've conveyed up to here in ways that also impact the participants more directly, right? So how can I tell the participants, not as part of the intervention, let's say I'm going to do an evaluation and they ask me, okay, what's the effectiveness of the program? Like, how much do children learn about, I don't know, gender norms? Are gender norms important? Like, when they have all these questions when I go to the field. And so I like to start picking into these graphs. I mean, I wouldn't show them this graph. I would show them, I would talk through these things. But some of the things that we're learning is that their awareness matters a lot. And so one of the things that we're trying to do constantly through our evaluation work is to find ways to give back to the girls and to sort of raise that awareness among them. So maybe that sort of creates, that interaction sort of creates new synergies. Because again, we've seen it again and again that there's a connection between skills they develop together, but also there's this awareness element that we haven't fully unpacked, but it seems to be very latent and very important, and we're working around that. I know that, well, I'm going to come back to this point actually in one more slide.
Fernanda, sorry, just 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to wrap this up. So the other thing I want to mention is that I think we need to generate longitudinal data and narratives. Gender gaps, one of the things that we see is that they tend to grow in time. We know that girls in particular, at least in the contexts where we work, tend to face increasing barriers since puberty, and therefore single-time evaluations, cross-sectional approaches feel sometimes insufficient because the skills that we need to build are meaningful depending on the context where the participants live and experience life. And so new challenges and new barriers may have implications for how those skills need to be, built. And I think looking at impact and at data in a longitudinal manner gives you a lot of information about the needs that girls are facing and which skills are sort of, changing in the wrong direction at a given period of time. And trying to understand those things becomes really important when you try to build, long-lasting skills that are actually helpful for the participants to live fulfilling lives. So the longitudinal piece is really important. I'm going to go through this one a little quickly. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with gender transformative principles of evaluation, but the way in which we interpret that is that we need to adopt an intersectional gender lens. We need to focus on the context and relations. We need to diversify our methodologies and include a lot of qualitative work, and we need to engage participants in the R&D cycle. And overall, the evidence and the data that we need to provide responses to the challenges that we see today, but also to build that awareness in participants, and also to create flows of information that help all of us be more aligned. And by all of us, I mean me as an evaluator, the program director, the person in the field implementing the program, the trainers, the girls themselves, or the participants themselves. You know, we need to generate evidence that sort of feeds into each other. We need to be in constant dialogue, and we need to do that with an intersectional lens. This idea of context and relations, which I think is a little bit more evident when you think about it, when you think about a program across time, you know, this longitudinal sort of element that I'm trying to highlight. You know, that is extremely important when you're trying to, again, build skills that are helpful to overcome barriers that are dynamic, right, that appear in time. Diversifying our many methodologies is essential. I can't stress enough how much we rely on our qualitative work. All those numbers that I shared at the beginning generally come with extensive work with participants to try to understand, okay, what exactly changed? How exactly are you applying the things that you learned I don't know, at home or in the community? And then back to the issue of this awareness and skills sort of building together. We try to give back to participants as much as we can. It's super challenging. I could spend hours talking about that. But we're trying to sort of build that awareness in all these interactions. And I think gender transformative principles summarize this better. I think we cannot just generate data that is that only looks at, you know, statistical changes in time. I think that's very important, but then we also need to understand the why, the how long, the what next, you know, it's a lot more complex. And I think that's the one thing that I want you to stay with. You know, we need to generate a lot of new data, meaningful data. We're living through a time where gender is effectively under attack. We know that gender programming is effective, but we do need to create mechanisms through which to maintain the flow of information with its complexity and with relevance, not just for us, but for the people who are supposedly being benefited from these types of programs. And I think that requires adopting this gender transformating principles that I just shared, and engaging in long-term dialogues with communities, with participants, trying to build awareness in them. Eventually, what you want is that the participants, you know, develop agency and have the skills to really deal with very challenging barriers and conditions. And so, you know, they need to be engaged in this flow. And I think through better data and through better narratives, we can reverse some of the trends that we're seeing. And again, I think I feel very privileged to be working in gender right now, and to work for an organization that cares so deeply about it. I do feel responsible to, you know, to keep producing reports and data, but also to try to be as thoughtful as I can, so that we can generate narratives that are actually meaningful, sustainable, and that helps us get to a more gender equal world. I'm done.
Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you very much. So now we will proceed with the presentation of Professor Hoskins, and you can put the mic on Q&A.
We don't hear.
Can you hear us?
Now I can.
Can you hear us, everyone? Great.
Okay, so I'm gonna share the offline version. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Okay, great. So thank you very much to everybody, and thank you to Fernanda. I think that was a really excellent global introduction to the context and about evaluation and how important it's to do that. So luckily, this means that we can go straight into the heart and dig into the data within our presentation. So what we're looking at today is we're trying to identify if we can find particular methods that can mitigate and reduce the inequalities that we find in girls' confidence in politics. And we want to do this. It's part of the wider GEPIC project, which we're trying to do this more broadly. But here we're doing this within an experiment that we developed, which was just a very short 90-minute session, but it gives us an idea before we're working now on a longer 5-class intervention. And we were looking here particularly to find something beyond, because in the quantitative field of research, we only really have the open classroom climate, which is looked at and discussed, and it's been over-discussed in a way. But there are plenty of other, plenty of other methods that we're using in the citizenship education and citizenship education, which is based on gender. So we wanted to have a look at these and identify if these can reduce the inequalities in political self-efficacy. So I won't go into depth on this today because it's we don't have time in the context of this seminar, but just to say that we're looking at the more political science understanding of party politics or partisan political self-efficacy, because this is where the gender gap really is the most broad. And Quinn will get me through the presentation super fast at this rate. Okay, so don't worry, we'll have enough time for you, Quinn. So we're going to be using our political science lens to look at the partisan political self-efficacy that focuses on knowledge and understanding of politics and being able to act in politics when the young girls are older. So the reason we're doing this, and as Fernanda said, how important data is, well, this graph says it all, that the gender inequalities when controlling for levels of knowledge, because we know that girls have higher levels, typically have higher levels of knowledge and skills in the area of politics, but when it comes to confidence, this is not the case. So this graph is when we're controlling for the levels of knowledge and for other dimensions, then we still see that this gap between girls and boys through almost every country that we find this measure in the world. And what we know also is that from using longitudinal data, Fernanda also mentioned how important this is, that as we can see, this is in the UK, that as boys get older, between the ages of 11 to 16, gradually their political self-efficacy goes up and up, whilst the girls remains significantly without any significant differences. It basically stays at the same point between the ages of 11 to 16. And what we find is that it doesn't change much after that. So the significant ages, the significant point in time is that age between 11 to 16. What we also know, which we can't go into detail about, but was our colleague in GEPIC, Gemma Garcia, Roberta, we also find, using longitudinal data, that the more that the open classroom climate is experienced in the classroom, boys have their confidence increases. And the more that the climate is open in classrooms, the more that the girls' political self-efficacy decreases. So something is going very wrong in the school context, which means that boys are profiting much more from these experiences than girls. And this is the whole, this is the research behind GEPIC and why we do the research. So we're looking at a couple of methods. One method which comes from critical race theories, and this is the use of counter-narratives. And this is a teaching strategy that provides marginal voices and individuals from marginal backgrounds new ways to narrate their lives. And we have a definition of counter-narratives here, which is stories which people tell and live, which offer either implicitly or explicitly ways to dominate. Oh, I can't read this because it's behind the...
Yeah. I try to minimize it, but...
Okay, don't worry. To dominate cultural narratives. Okay, let's get it. Okay, so we have two counter-narratives that we've used within our experiment. One was Rosamond Adu-Kassi Deborah, and this was a lady from London who had managed to create political change using the formal as well as the activist methodology, so also working with the Parliament and with lawyers in order to change the legal system on pollution in London. And we have a second counter-narrative, which I'll show shortly on the next slide, which is about Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who's the president from Barbados, and she has done a lot from the global south in creating political change and getting the voices of the global south heard within the discussions on climate change. So I just want to say one or two more words on this before going on, and that this is an opportunity for the individuals to reframe their self-identity and to be able to see real stories which show different and imagined lives. So it's a way that they can identify with these new stories and change their own narratives and build that power into their lives. So I will now go on to the second methodology, which is think, pair, share. And the origins of this are in the research on collaborative learning. This research shows that if you have small group work, in particular those working with pairs, then this empowers girls or shy students in order to give them greater confidence to get involved in the discussions, into broader classroom discussions afterwards. So it was an idea which we built on, which is also used in maths lessons as well, in order to build confidence for girls there, and has been successful. So both of these strategies were seen as different ways that we could change the dynamics and change the levels of power between the individuals before a wider classroom discussion, in order to see if these approaches could build the political self-efficacy of the girls from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Thank you so much, Rani. So I will continue the presentation to focus on the methodology in our study and also some initial finding. So for the experiment, we have the general questions like, can these teaching methods increase partisan political self-efficacy of girls. And then you may see that the target group schools in our study is we focus on the schools where we have more than 15% of free school meals and more than 15% of English as an additional language. And then here we focus on the 5 schools with 253 female students in that mixed schools. And it's just like what Bryony shared before, we have 3 different groups for the experiments. We have the group A, who will read the 2 counter narratives of successful Black women creating change through form of politics in the domain of climate change. And this group, we use the teaching methods like think, share. And for the group B, the students were asked to read the same 2 counter narratives, and then they discuss in pairs their thoughts. And this group is think, pair, share. So you see that they have 3 small tasks: think, pair, share, not only think, share like group A. And the group C, we requested the student just to read the text on the science of climate change, and this is the control group. So regarding the number of students, as we introduced before, we have 253 students in the 5 mixed schools, and the number of girls in those schools are 117 female students. And then I will just skip this characteristics of student because as we introduced before, we just have 46%, more than 46% of female students in this sample, and we have more than 50% of male students in the study. And so for English is an additional language, we have like more than 29% of students who reported that English is the additional language, and more than 67% of them reported that no, English is not the additional language. And about the experiments, I think this is what happened in the classroom when we conducted the quasi-experimental activities in the school. We have different phases, and you can focus on the phase 3, where we have 3 different activities for them. So the group A would do the counter narrative and think, share. The group B in the middle, they did the counter narrative, think, pair, share. And then the group C, this is the control group, so they didn't do the activities like the other groups. So here we focus on the research questions and statistical methods for this research. We have 5 different hypotheses here. And for the first 3 hypotheses, we would like to see to have the hypothesis like there is significant change in the average amount of girls' political self-efficacy in the intervention group A. The hypothesis 2 is similar, but we focus on the intervention group B. And for the hypothesis 3, we expect to see no significant change in the average amounts of girls' political self-efficacy in this control group. It means we conducted the bootstrap parity tests for different groups separately. And for the main hypothesis here, we have the hypothesis 4 is that the experiment significantly affects the change in girls' political self-efficacy in the intervention group A relative to the change observed in the control group C after controlling for for English as an additional language and socioeconomic status. And the hypothesis 5, the experiment significantly affects the change in girls' political self-efficacy in the intervention group B relative to the change in the control group after controlling for the other covariates. And for these 2 hypotheses, we use diff-in-diff methods to answer the research questions. And I can quickly explain why we selected the diff-in-diff. So there are 2 main reasons for this. The first reason is that the magical thing of diff-in-diff methods is to isolate the effect of the intervention with the other factors that might affect the outcome. here is the girls' political self-efficacy. Let's give an example. For example, the outcomes, the self-efficacy of students can be affected by the other factors like the general learning activity or the other factors, but the deep in deep can help to isolate those change because it focuses on the change in self-efficacy from the pre-test to the post-test. And the second reason is that if we simply just compare the mean between the pre-test and post-test and between the control group and the intervention group, the findings might be misleading in the way that it doesn't account for the difference at the baseline level. For example, the self-efficacies of different groups can be a little bit different at the baseline, but for the deep in deep, it accounts for that situation. So we think that this is the magical thing the deep in deep can provide to help us answer the research questions without many bias, without the bias. So let's go to the results. Firstly, we would like to look at the effectiveness of the intervention, like as a whole. So here you may see that we look at the impact or the effectiveness of the intervention with the whole sample. So here we have both boys and girls in this. So that's why the whole sample size is like 237. And in general, it shows the difference between the pre-test and post-test in the whole sample and also in different intervention group A and B, you may see there. But for the control groups, the H3 hypothesis, it's just like what we expected, like it shows the non-significant effect. And now we just go to the subsample, the girls only in this pooled sample to see if the experiments increased girls' political self-efficacy who were attending mixed school. And then here, the findings show that for the whole sample of girls here, the number is smaller, just 114. It showed the significant change between the pre-test and post-test. It's significant at 0.5 level, and then also it shows the significant change in the pre-test and post-test in the intervention group B. For the intervention group A is not significant. So the H1 here, the hypothesis 1, is not supported in this. And for the control group C, just like what we expected, it shows the non-significant effect. And as we showed you before, if we just simply measure the means between the pre-test and post-test to see the impact of the intervention is not enough. So we go further with the strict methods of deep in deep model. And it's boring, but you can see that we just focus on the impact or effectiveness of the intervention before and after the experiments, which is the interaction between the times and the intervention here, as you may see. And we control for the other covariates. Here we have the language as a second language, and also social economic status measured by the numbers of book at home. And also we have the random intercept at the student level because of the structure of the data. And then now we also have an overview of the deep in deep with the whole sample, the big sample where both boys and girls are included in this sample. And we see that there is a significant impact of the interventions on increasing students' political self-efficacy, and is in both intervention group A, intervention group B, relative to the control group C's, and this is what we expect to see. We expected to see as well, and they are significant at 0.5 level. And now when we closely look at the subsample just for girls only, because we want to see if girls can benefit from this. And we can see that it's just significant, marginally significant at 10% level in the intervention group B. So it means that the hypothesis 5 is supported, like the intervention help to help increase the girls' political self-efficacy after compared to the group C. but in the intervention, but for the intervention group B only. For the intervention group A is non-significant. So now we have the figure to show you like the easier way to show the trend in the trends of self-political self-efficacies before and after the intervention. So there is the comparison between group A, the girls in group A and the girls in group C before and after the test. And as I mentioned before, regardless of the starting point, if there is no significant aspect, you can expect to see that the group A, which is the blue line, should follow the gray line, because this we call the parallel trends. It means it will be similar to group C. But here you see the big gap, like the group A have the green line, which shows the good effectiveness of the intervention that help them to increase self-efficacy. So there is a very good thing in the deep in diff model, as we see. And when we compare to the group B, the girls in group B and also the girls in group C, we also see the similar results. Like the group B shows there is the impact in increasing girls' self-efficacy after the intervention and in relative to group C. So for this intervention group B is just significant at 10% level, but we see very good signs of the effectiveness of the two interventions in our study. So there is the initial findings we got until this moment. And just a couple of things about the discussion, although it's not statistically significant in the intervention group A, and just marginally significant 10% level in the intervention group B relative to the control group C, it still shows the change in the change of girls' self-efficacy after the experiments. And of course, we have several limitations, including the sample size, and we need more statistic power for our follow-up analysis. So for some conclusions, I will give the floor to Brian to conclude.
So what we can see is just within a very short period of time, because this was just 15 minutes that this text was read and one group had a discussion on it. What we can see are some effects of this, because all the students engaged in a discussion afterwards. So everybody and our control group C had a text on climate change. They did something as well. So in comparison to that, in a short, very short space of time, that something happened, right? And girls and boys, it seems that everybody increased their self-efficacy from reading this text, and those engaged in the conversation even more. It shows that maybe sometimes it's a combination of methods which is the most effective, not just a single methodology by itself, but by combining two approaches together, we seem to have the most significant. As Christian had said to us before, as a teacher, if you're 90% sure that these are the methods that are going to be effective for girls, well, this is already a lot of knowledge that we didn't have before we had undertaken these experiments. So we look forward to discussions with Fernanda and with the rest of you on this.
Thank you very much both for your presentations. It was great to see both of them. So now we'll stop the recording. Thank you very much.